The moment Caleb Reed touched my waist, Ethan Walker forgot how to pretend we were only friends. The room went quiet so fast I heard the ice shift in Ethan's glass from 20 feet away, a tiny crack of sound beneath the music and laughter. We were on the top floor of the Meridian Hotel, where downtown Chicago glittered beyond the windows like someone had spilled diamonds across black velvet. I had only come because my coworkers begged me to celebrate the hospital fundraiser with them, and because, for once, I wanted to be seen as something other than the Omega who always left early with Ethan Walker's coat over his shoulders. For 7 years, Ethan had been my safest place and my sharpest wound. He knew how I took my coffee, which side of the sidewalk I preferred, how crowded elevators made my pulse jump, and exactly when my suppressants needed refilling before I even checked the calendar. He drove me home after late shifts. He fixed the loose chain on my apartment door. He stood between me and every alpha who looked too long. Yet every time someone smiled and asked if we were together, Ethan's answer never changed. Just friends. 2 words, clean and cold, spoken like a locked door. I had learned to laugh when he said it. I had learned to lower my eyes before anyone noticed the way those words landed. Tonight, I had decided I was tired of waiting outside that door. So I wore the navy suit I usually save for weddings, left the soft gray scarf Ethan gave me folded on my bed, and accepted Caleb's hand when he offered to lead me onto the dance floor. Caleb was new in the pediatric wing, charming in a bright, easy way, with sandy blonde hair, a warm smile, and the kind of confidence that did not ask permission to fill a room. He did not hide his interest behind favors and silence. He told me I looked good. He asked if I was enjoying myself. He made me feel, for one dangerous minute, like wanting something clear was not a crime. Then someone bumped into a server behind us, and Caleb moved quickly, placing one steady hand at my waist to guide me out of the path of a falling tray. Nothing shattered. No one got hurt. It lasted less than a second, but Ethan saw it. His face changed before he moved, the polite mask slipping away to reveal something older, darker, and far less controlled. His gray eyes locked on Caleb's hand, as if that single touch had rewritten the entire room. Caleb noticed too. His fingers left my waist at once, but the challenge in his smile remained. I should have stepped back. I should have said something normal. Instead, I stood frozen as Ethan crossed the floor toward us, every conversation fading around his approach. When he stopped in front of me, he did not look at Caleb first. He looked at me, and his voice dropped into a tone I had never heard from my best friend before. "Noah, come here." Ethan had used my name 1,000 times before, but never like that. Not as a request, not as a warning wrapped in velvet, not as something that made the air around me feel suddenly too small. Caleb looked from him to me, one eyebrow lifting with careful amusement, but I could feel the question moving through the people nearby before anyone said it out loud. What exactly was Ethan Walker to me? For 7 years, I had answered that question the way Ethan taught me to answer it. He was my friend, my best friend, my emergency contact. The person who showed up at my apartment with soup when I had a fever and scolded me for walking 3 blocks in January without gloves. The person who waited outside the pharmacy when I picked up my monthly medication, pretending to check emails so I would not feel embarrassed. The person who remembered that I hated cilantro, loved old bookstores, and could not fall asleep if a closet door was open even 1 inch. He was everywhere in my life, stitched into every ordinary corner so tightly that losing him felt impossible to imagine. And still, he was not mine. I looked at his outstretched hand, then at the space behind him where the city lights blurred against the glass. Ethan's jaw was tense, his shoulders controlled, his expression polished into something calm enough to fool strangers. But I knew him better than strangers. I saw the fracture underneath. I saw the way his fingers curled once, as if he had almost reached for me and stopped himself by force. Caleb broke the silence first, his voice light, but not cruel. "Noah can decide where he wants to stand." That should have been a simple sentence. It should have made me grateful. Instead, it landed between us like a match near gasoline, because Ethan's eyes finally left me and moved to Caleb. No growl, no threat, no scene loud enough for security to notice. Just one quiet look from an alpha who had spent years mastering restraint, and suddenly the elegant ballroom felt like it had dropped 10 degrees. "I know he can," Ethan said. "Then let him," Caleb replied. My pulse thudded hard enough that I felt it in my throat. The old version of me would have stepped behind Ethan automatically, grateful for the familiar shelter of his presence. But something had shifted before I ever came to this party. Maybe it started when I left his scarf at home. Maybe it started the 100th time someone asked if we were together, and Ethan answered before I could breathe. I lifted my chin and took one small step away from both of them. Ethan noticed. Of course he noticed. He noticed everything about me except the one thing I had needed him to see. "I am not a jacket you forgot to claim," I said, my voice quiet enough that only they could hear. Ethan went still. Caleb's smile faded. For the first time that night, neither alpha had anything to say. I thought Ethan would argue. I thought he would reach for logic, for habit, for the calm explanations he always used whenever the world got too close to the truth. Instead, he looked at me as if I had taken something sharp from my own chest and placed it in his hands. For one breath, the mask was gone, and beneath it was not anger. It was fear. That almost broke me. It would have been so easy to soften, to apologize, to step back into the role I had worn for years because it kept him near me. But I was tired of surviving on almost. Almost chosen. Almost loved. Almost brave enough to ask for what I wanted. The music shifted behind us, a slow song melting into something brighter, and the room began pretending not to watch. That was what people did in expensive places. They hid curiosity behind crystal glasses and polite smiles. I took another step back, and Ethan's eyes followed the movement like it cost him something. "Noah," he said again, quieter this time. Not a command now. A plea he did not know how to make. Caleb turned slightly toward me, giving me space without abandoning me inside the tension. I appreciated that more than I expected. He was not trying to win a contest. He was simply standing there, clear and steady, in a way Ethan had never allowed himself to be. "I should get some air," I said. Ethan moved at once. "I will go with you." "No." The word came out softer than I meant it to, but it stopped him anyway. I watched his hand fall back to his side, watched the careful pain tighten around his mouth. "You do not get to follow me every time I am hurt and still pretend you are not the reason." The silence after that felt enormous. Caleb's gaze dropped, giving us privacy in the only way he could. Ethan looked like he wanted to say 10 different things and trusted none of them. I turned before I could change my mind and walked toward the balcony doors at the far end of the ballroom. Each step felt impossible, as if invisible threads were pulling me back toward him. For 7 years, Ethan had been the person I ran to when my hands shook, when my rent went up, when my mother called and made me feel small, when the city felt too loud and my own omega instincts felt like a language I had never been taught to speak. Walking away from him, even across a hotel ballroom, felt like stepping out of shelter during a storm. The balcony was cold enough to sting my cheeks. Chicago wind swept between the towers, carrying the distant sound of traffic from Michigan Avenue far below. I gripped the railing and breathed until the tightness in my chest loosened. Through the glass, I could see Ethan still standing where I left him, surrounded by light, looking for the first time like a man who had finally realized a door could close from the other side. I stayed on the balcony longer than I needed to because the cold gave me something simple to understand. Wind was honest. It touched your face and admitted it was there. It did not stand beside you for 7 years, memorize the shape of your loneliness, and then call itself friendship when people started asking questions. Below me, Michigan Avenue moved in bright ribbons of headlights, yellow taxis and black sedans sliding past like the city had no idea my whole life had tilted inside a hotel ballroom. I pressed my palms to the metal railing until the chill bit through my skin. I wanted to be angry at Caleb for touching me, angry at Ethan for reacting, angry at myself for wanting his reaction to mean something more than instinct. But the truth was uglier and simpler. Some part of me had waited for Ethan to lose control. Not in a frightening way, not in a way that would make me unsafe, but in the quiet, devastating way of a man who finally forgot to lie. The balcony door opened behind me, and for half a second my heart betrayed me. I thought it was Ethan. I hated how quickly hope rose. But it was Caleb who stepped outside, holding 2 paper cups from the hotel coffee station. He kept several feet between us and lifted one cup in a gentle offer. "Hot chocolate," he said. "No pressure. It just looked cold out here." I stared at him, surprised by the ordinary kindness of it. "You really know how to walk into complicated situations." Caleb smiled, but there was no arrogance in it now. "I work in a hospital. Complicated situations are kind of the job. I accepted the cup because my hands were shaking and because he noticed without making it embarrassing. The warmth seeped into my fingers. For a while, neither of us spoke. Through the glass, Ethan had moved closer to the balcony doors, but he had not come outside. He stood in the golden light with one hand in his pocket, still as a statue. Watching me like distance was a punishment he had chosen to accept. Caleb followed my gaze and sighed softly. He loves you. My laugh came out small and tired. You do not know that. No, Caleb said. But I know what an alpha looks like when he is trying not to cross a line and failing at hiding how much the line hurts. I looked down at the street again. Then why does he keep drawing it? Caleb leaned his shoulder against the wall, careful, relaxed, unthreatening. Maybe because he thinks wanting you is the same as taking something from you. That sentence slipped under my ribs and found a memory I had tried not to touch. My first heat, 7 years ago, in a dorm bathroom on a rainy October night. My suppressants failing, my whole body terrified by instincts I did not understand. Ethan had found me before anyone else did. He had wrapped me in his coat, sat outside my door all night, and never once made me feel ashamed. After that, he changed. Softer in action, colder in words. Closer than anyone, yet always one step away. I turned back to the glass just as Ethan looked down, as if he could feel the memory waking in me. Caleb's voice gentled. The real question is not whether he wants you, Noah. It is whether you are tired enough to make him tell the truth. Caleb's question stayed with me as if he had placed it directly in my palm, small and heavy and impossible to ignore. I looked through the balcony glass at Ethan, and for the first time, I wondered how much of our history I had misunderstood. I remembered that October night in college with the rain beating against the bathroom window and my phone slipping from my shaking fingers when I tried to call for help. Ethan had arrived breathless from running across campus, his hair soaked, his hoodie dark with rain, his face pale with a fear he tried to hide the second he saw me. He had not touched me without asking. He had not crowded me. He had sat on the hallway floor with his back against the door and read restaurant reviews out loud because I said I needed to hear something normal. In the morning, he walked me to the health clinic, waited through every appointment, and bought me pancakes at a diner 2 miles away because I said I was starving. That was the day Ethan became my shelter. It was also the day he started calling me his friend with the careful precision of someone locking a dangerous room. I had thought he was embarrassed. I had thought my omega nature had made him uncomfortable. I had thought he saw me as fragile, a responsibility, a person to protect but never desire as a future. Now, standing in the cold with hot chocolate warming my hands, I realized there might have been another truth hiding behind his silence. Caleb pushed away from the wall. I should go back inside before this starts looking even more dramatic than it already does. His smile was gentle. For what it is worth, Noah, I like you. I meant that. But I am not interested in being used as proof that someone else cares. Shame warmed my cheeks. I am sorry. Do not be, he said. Just choose yourself before you choose either of us. Then he opened the balcony door and stepped back into the party. I watched him pass Ethan. They did not exchange a challenge this time. Caleb only said something too quiet for me to hear. Ethan's eyes moved from Caleb to me, and whatever Caleb said made the last of Ethan's restraint crack, not loudly, not dramatically, but in the devastating way his shoulders lowered, as if he had been carrying a weight for 7 years and could no longer pretend it was light. The door opened again. Ethan stepped outside. The wind caught the edge of his black coat, and the noise of the ballroom softened behind him until there was only the city, the cold, and the space between us. He stopped 6 feet away, careful enough to hurt. I am not here to drag you back inside, he said. His voice was rougher than before. I am not here to tell you who you can dance with. I swallowed. Then why are you here? Ethan looked at my hands around the paper cup, then at my face, and the honesty in his eyes frightened me more than his jealousy ever could. Because Caleb is right, he said, and because I have been lying to you longer than I can forgive myself for. Lying about what? I asked, though my voice already knew enough to tremble. Ethan looked past me toward the city, where the lights of Chicago blurred in the wind like 1,000 small fires refusing to go out. For a long moment, he said nothing, and I hated that even his silence still had the power to hold me in place. Then he reached into his coat pocket and took out the gray scarf I had left folded on my bed. My breath caught. You forgot this, he said softly. No, I did not. His hand tightened around the fabric. I know. The admission landed heavier than an accusation. He had gone to my apartment before the fundraiser. He had seen the scarf left behind like a message I was too afraid to write. I should have been angry. Part of me was. But another part remembered every winter morning he had wrapped that scarf around my neck with careful hands and called it practical, never tender, never intimate, always hiding the truth beneath ordinary words. 7 years ago, Ethan said, and the world seemed to narrow around us. Outside that clinic, the doctor pulled me aside while you were asleep in the exam room. My fingers went cold around the paper cup. What doctor? Dr. Lang, the Omega specialist. He swallowed, and for the first time since I had known him, Ethan Walker looked ashamed. She said your reaction that night was not only a failed suppressant episode. She said your body had started forming a bond response. The wind moved between us, sharp and sudden. I stared at him, unable to make sense of the sentence. With who? Ethan closed his eyes. When he opened them again, the answer was already there. With me. My heart seemed to miss an entire beat. The memory returned in pieces. Rain on tile, Ethan's coat around my shoulders, his voice steady outside the door, the strange calm that had settled in my chest only when he was near. I had thought it was trust. I had thought it was relief. I had never known it had been something deeper, something my body had understood before my mind was ready. Why did no one tell me? I whispered. Ethan flinched as if the question had touched an old bruise. Dr. Lang wanted to. I asked her to wait until you were stable. Then I told myself I would tell you the next day. Then the next week. Then after graduation. Then after you got your first apartment. Then after you stopped looking at me like I had saved your life. His voice broke on the last word, quiet but unmistakable. I was terrified that if I told you, every choice you made after that would feel stolen. I thought if I stepped back, you would be free. Pain rose through me so quickly I almost laughed. You did not step back, Ethan. You stayed. Close enough to make everyone else impossible and far enough to make me feel unwanted. He looked at me then, raw and pale beneath the balcony lights. I know, he said. That is the part one cannot forgive. I wanted to hate him. For one clean second, I wanted anger to rise bright enough to burn away every soft thing I had ever felt for Ethan Walker. It would have been easier that way. Easier to look at him and see a coward instead of the boy who had sat on a cold dorm hallway floor all night because I was afraid to be alone. Easier to remember every time he said we were friends and forget every time his actions quietly said something else. But love, I was learning, did not disappear just because truth arrived late. It only stood there with all its bruises showing. I set the hot chocolate on the balcony ledge before my shaking hands could spill it. You let me believe I imagined it, I said. Ethan's face tightened. I know. You let me think I was the only one holding on to something that was never real. It was real, he said, the words coming fast now, rough with years of being swallowed. Noah, it was always real. That was the problem. I looked at him then, really looked at him, and saw the battle he had been losing quietly for 7 years. His restraint had never been peace. It had been fear dressed up as respect, sacrifice twisted until it became a cage for both of us. You do not get to decide what protects me by keeping me uninformed, I said. That is not freedom. That is just another kind of control. Ethan lowered his eyes, and the sight of it stole some of the sharpness from my anger. He did not argue. He did not defend himself. The alpha who could make an entire ballroom go silent simply stood in the cold and accepted the truth because it came from me. The balcony door opened behind him before either of us could speak again. Caleb stepped out, not smiling now, his coat folded over one arm. He glanced between us and seemed to understand he had walked into something fragile. I am leaving, he said. I only came to give Noah this. The wind is getting worse. Ethan took one careful step aside, giving Caleb a clear path to me, and that small movement unsettled me more than jealousy had. He was choosing not to stand between us. Caleb handed me the coat without touching my skin. Thank you, I said. Caleb nodded, then looked at Ethan. You know, he is not a prize for the alpha who waits the longest. Ethan's jaw tightened, but he stayed silent. Caleb turned back to me, his voice gentler. And he is not a punishment you owe yourself because you are lonely. That reached me. Maybe because Caleb had nothing to gain from saying it. Maybe because he was the first person all night to speak as if my choice mattered more than either alpha's feelings. He stepped toward the door, then paused. Ask yourself one thing, Noah. Do you want him, or do you want freedom from waiting for him? Then Caleb went back inside, leaving the question behind like a light switched on in a room I had been afraid to enter. Caleb's question did not demand an answer right away, and maybe that was why it hurt so much. It did not push. It simply waited. The balcony door closed behind him, sealing Ethan and me back inside the cold, glittering quiet above Chicago. I held Caleb's coat against my chest, but did not put it on. Across from me, Ethan stood with my gray scarf still in his hands, the fabric twisted between his fingers like a confession he had carried too long. For 7 years, I had wanted him to cross the distance. For 7 years, I had imagined him reaching for me with certainty, saying my name without fear, choosing me in a way no one could misunderstand. But now that the truth was standing between us, I realized I did not want to be claimed in a moment of jealousy. I did not want to be chosen because another alpha had finally made him afraid of losing me. I wanted to know whether Ethan Walker loved me when there was no audience, no rival, no instinct forcing honesty out of him like a storm breaking a window. Answer him, Ethan said quietly. I blinked. What? His eyes lifted to mine, and there was no command in them now. No icy alpha control. No silent claim. Only a man who looked like he had finally understood that love without choice was just another beautiful cage. Caleb asked if you want me, or if you want freedom from waiting for me. I want you to answer him. Not me. Not tonight. Somewhere inside yourself where I cannot influence it. My throat tightened. That is unfair. No, Ethan said. What I did was unfair. He stepped closer, then stopped himself before closing the full distance. That restraint, for once, felt different. Not like a wall. Like respect arriving late, but arriving. I thought I was protecting your freedom by never telling you what your body had already started to feel. But I stayed close enough to shape every choice you made. I became your safest place, then used that safety as an excuse to hide from my own fear. The wind moved sharply around us, tugging at the ends of the scarf in his hand. I do love you, Noah, he said, and the simple sentence struck harder than any dramatic confession could have. I loved you when you fell asleep in the diner booth after that clinic visit. I loved you when you cried over your first apartment because the radiator sounded like it was haunted. I loved you when you got your hospital badge and pretended you were not proud because you did not want to look too excited. I loved you through ordinary Tuesdays and bad coffee and grocery store arguments about cereal. But I will not call you mine just because I finally found the courage to say it. Then, before I could breathe, Ethan lowered himself to one knee on the balcony floor. Not like a prince from a fairy tale. Not like an alpha demanding surrender. Like someone setting his pride down because it no longer mattered more than the person in front of him. He placed the gray scarf gently at my feet. I lied when I called you my friend, he said. But I will not lie again and call you mine unless you choose me first. For a long time, I could not move. Ethan Walker was on one knee in front of me with the Chicago wind pulling at his dark hair, my gray scarf resting between us like the quiet history of everything we had been too afraid to name. Beyond the ballroom windows, the city lights shimmered across the lake, blurred by thin streaks of rain that had begun to gather against the glass, while inside, the music had faded into a silence so complete that I could almost hear my own heartbeat. Every conversation had stopped. Every pair of eyes seemed to hover somewhere near us, pretending not to stare, yet unable to look away. I had imagined this moment so many times that I thought I would know exactly what to feel when it came. Joy, maybe. Relief. The beautiful rush of finally being chosen. Instead, I felt the ache of 7 years, all of it arriving at once. The dorm hallway where he had first stolen half my fries because he insisted cafeteria food tasted better off someone else's tray. The diner pancakes at 2 in the morning after impossible exams. The apartment chain he quietly fixed because he hated the sound it made every time I opened the door. The pharmacy parking lot where he waited in freezing rain because I had the flu and refused to let me drive myself home. Every winter morning he had wrapped that scarf around me and called it practical because tenderness had frightened him more than distance. Every birthday he remembered before anyone else. Every text asking if I had eaten. Every goodbye that lasted 1 second longer than friendship required before he stepped back as though he had already crossed a line he could never admit existed. Those memories did not comfort me. They hurt because they proved that the love had always been there while the courage had not. I stepped closer, and Ethan went completely still. He did not reach for me. He did not lift his head until I placed my hand gently over the scarf. Even then, he waited, almost afraid that any movement might shatter the fragile hope balanced between us. "Stand up," I said. My voice was quiet, but it carried through the silent ballroom. His eyes searched mine, careful and uncertain, looking not for forgiveness but for permission. "Noah, I am not answering you while you are kneeling like you owe me a lifetime in one gesture." Something fragile moved across his face. Hope, maybe, but he held it back, as though he no longer trusted hope to stay. He rose slowly, leaving the scarf in my hands. For a brief moment, neither of us touched the other. The distance between us was less than a step, yet it still held 7 years of hesitation, fear, misunderstandings, and choices neither of us could undo. I wrapped the scarf once around my wrist instead of my neck, not because I was accepting everything, and not because I had forgiven everything, but because I wanted to choose what the symbol meant now. For years it had represented waiting. Tonight, it would represent choice. Ethan watched the movement with a breath he seemed afraid to finish, his gaze fixed on the careful way my fingers folded the familiar fabric. I wondered if he remembered every morning he had tucked it around my neck before pretending it was simply because the weather report predicted snow. "I do want you," I said, and the words shook as they left me. Saying them aloud felt both terrifying and strangely freeing. That is the part that makes this hurt so much. I wanted you before I understood bonds, before doctors and instincts and all the things you tried to protect me from. I wanted the man who remembered my coffee order and argued with me about cheap umbrellas. I wanted the idiot who insisted pineapple belonged on pizza just because he enjoyed watching me complain. I wanted the person who always knew when I was lying about being fine. I wanted my best friend. But I cannot go back to being your almost. Ethan nodded once, his eyes bright under the balcony lights. The confidence that had made him one of the most respected alphas in every room meant nothing now. He looked like a man hoping not to lose the only future he truly wanted. "I will never ask you to." "Then do not claim me tonight," I said. "Do not turn this into one dramatic confession and expect 7 years to disappear. Do not ask me to believe one beautiful speech more than I believe 7 years of silence. If this is real, then let it be real tomorrow too. Let it still be real when everyone goes home and nobody is applauding." His voice was barely above the wind. "What do you want me to do?" I looked through the glass at the ballroom, at the people pretending not to watch, at Caleb near the exit with his coat missing and his dignity intact. He had every reason to resent us, yet somehow he stood there with quiet grace, refusing to make my decision harder than it already was. Then I looked back at Ethan. "Court me tomorrow." The words settled between us with surprising gentleness. They were not a rejection. They were not acceptance. They were an invitation to build something that had never truly existed before. For the first time that night, Ethan smiled, not the polished smile he gave donors and department heads, not the confident expression he wore during interviews and board meetings, but something young and stunned and real, like the graduate student who had once nervously asked if I wanted to split pancakes after class because he could not think of a better excuse to spend another hour with me. "Tomorrow," he promised, "and the day after that, however long it takes." There was no urgency in his voice anymore, only quiet certainty. When we stepped back inside, the ballroom quieted again, but this time Ethan did not stand in front of me. He stood beside me. It was such a small movement that most people would never notice. Yet to me it felt larger than the proposal itself. He was no longer shielding me, speaking for me, or standing between me and everyone else. He was standing with me. Caleb saw us first. His gaze dropped to the scarf around my wrist, then lifted to my face, asking without words if I was all right. I nodded. He smiled like someone who knew when to leave a story that was no longer his. There was sadness in his expression, but no bitterness, only quiet acceptance, and perhaps a little relief that the truth had finally stopped hiding. Ethan turned to him, his voice calm enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Thank you for respecting Noah's choice." Caleb gave a small nod. "Keep doing the same." Then he walked away, disappearing into the crowd without looking back, carrying his own heartbreak with a dignity that made me respect him even more. The music resumed slowly, uncertain at first, then fuller, as if the room itself had been waiting for permission to breathe. Conversations gradually returned, glasses clinked again, and somewhere across the ballroom someone laughed a little too loudly in an obvious attempt to restore normalcy. Ethan offered me his hand, palm open, no demand in it, no expectation that I would take it simply because he had confessed. I looked at it for a long second before placing my fingers over his. Warmth moved through my wrist where the scarf touched my skin, not sudden or overwhelming, but gentle, steady, unmistakable, a soft pulse like a secret waking beneath cotton. Ethan felt it too. I knew because his breath caught, and his eyes dropped to the same place mine did. A faint silver line, no wider than a thread, shimmered beneath the fabric and vanished before either of us could speak. It was gone almost as quickly as it had appeared, leaving only silence and the echo of something ancient stirring beneath years of fear. He had not marked me. He had not claimed me. Neither instinct nor tradition had decided our future for us. But something in us had heard the truth at last, something deeper than fear and stronger than habit, and for the first time, neither of us looked away because neither of us needed to hide anymore. The future was still uncertain. Forgiveness would still take time. Trust would still have to be rebuilt through ordinary mornings instead of grand speeches. But as our hands remained loosely joined beneath the warm lights of the ballroom, I realized that for the first time in 7 years, we were no longer living inside almosts. We were finally walking toward a beginning that belonged to both of us.